This is, oh guys, we're going to get all interrupted by our ritual. So this is Susan
Simensky.
Susan Simensky, World War III.
Or Susan Simensky Beetala, depending on where you lived and in what time of history.
We're here at the World War III release party. So you were telling me about the Mental Health Patients Liberation?
Mental Patients Liberation Front was a group that existed on the Lower East Side in the late 1960s. And it consisted mostly of, it was all young people, mostly who had been incarcerated in mental hospitals as children for very dubious reasons. And my first husband, Tom Bruni, was, he was arrested for kicking his teacher in like second grade. And it was exposed later that she was beating kids in class. She was hitting kids in class. And he was a kid with ADHD before there was a name for it. And his mother was 19 years old with 2 children and widowed, and old school Italian, and had no self-confidence, no experience with the world, had never worked in a job, and had been married to Gino, who was in his 40s, who was like a maritime guy from Italy, and he died of cancer in his early 40s. So she had no way, she didn't understand how to defend her child at all. So he was sent to Rockland State Hospital, and he was incarcerated and drugged on an open ward with old men at the age of like 8 or 9, and labeled schizophrenic, which he was not. And so he was active in the high school student union. He was 17 when I met him, and was arrested for inciting to riot during the high school riots. And
what year was that?
That's hard to remember. That's like probably around 1968, 69.
Where was the high school riots?
The high school riots was incredible. Boys High in Brooklyn, which was an almost all black school, went out over racism and the war in Vietnam, both. They just went out, they walked out, they had to walk out, but instead of just having their own walkout, they sent traveling squads to all of the high schools in Brooklyn. They sent these flying squads out and called students to walk out. And so Tom and his friend Ira, his partner in crime, now Tom and Ira were from the next housing project over from where I grew up. I was from Boulevard Houses, and they were from Cypress Hills Project, I think. That was the name of it. It's somewhere near there. All along Linden Boulevard in Brooklyn and into Queens. So he got busted, he and Ira got busted as they took a step off a city bus going toward Lane High School. So they were arrested. I was working for The Guardian at that time, so it must have been 1968, 69. And I was assigned to go and cover it at Midwood High School in Flatbush. So I went there, and there was a walkout, and there was mounted police in the streets, and I wasn't real adept with the camera. And then it occurred to me that taking pictures of students throwing marbles under the feet of police horses would not be a good thing for these students. So I later drew a picture of it. And the picture will be in my upcoming book that does not yet have a name, about artwork on the front lines.
Cool. And you were, how old were you at the time?
I was 21.
So when did you start doing artwork? Like, was this part of like something that you were already doing, like activist type artwork, or?
I was doing artwork since I was a child. and won a scholarship to the Brooklyn Museum School out of first grade.
Wow.
And I was kind of, okay, you have talent.
So they were like, they had grade school.
Grade school.
Yeah, nice.
I would finish my schoolwork really fast, and they'd send me to the back of the room where I could use the easel. And I did that every single day. And then the teacher says, you're really good for a kid your age, and got me the scholarship at the Brooklyn Museum. And then I got scholarship after scholarship there. In second grade, I won the New York City Art Medal for International Brotherhood Week from the UN. And I still have it. It's like a bronze medal. And then my fate was written. Because I was really, did well in school. But I grew up in an immigrant community that was extremely dysfunctional. Jewish community right after World War II, right after the Holocaust.
What country? What nationality?
My mother and her family were refugees from a place that was called Bessarabia. And it was a country for a very brief period on the border of Romania, Poland, and Russia.
Bessarabia.
Bessarabia.
Sounds kind of like Bosnia and Romania.
Yeah, it kind of
bit.
does. But it's now in the Ukraine. So, super glad they decided to leave.
Yeah.
No, they left during a genocide. The worst genocide.
That's lucky that they got out.
1919 and 1921 were the worst genocides. As the whites were losing the Russian Revolution and they were driven out of Russia, they were driven into the southwest part near of the Ukraine, which is the place where the only place Jewish people were allowed to live. So it turned into a double whammy. They thought the Jews were against the Tsar. Haha, of course they were. And they thought that all the Jews were Reds, that they were communists, and many of them were communists and anarchists and socialists of different kinds. So anyhow, the Cossacks and the different Russian army and the racist groups all were coming in from outside. And they'd come into,
Try to speak a little louder.
Yeah, they'd come in from outside, and they'd come into a small village and say, if you're not gone by morning, you'll all be dead. And they raped women and killed children. And
that was the Russians, too?
That was the whites, the Tsarist Russians.
Oh, right, okay.
That was not the Russian, not the Bolsheviks.
Right.
This was the Tsarist troops and the Cossacks, the hereditary clans of horse-riding guys with scimitars coming in. So they had my grandfather bent over ready to chop off his head, and my grandmother threw herself on top of him and somehow talked them out of it. And then they packed up a pillowcase full of stuff and started walking. And that's how they came here.
What year was this? This was
1921.
1921, that's what I thought, yeah.
So my mother was 6, and by the time they got to New York, she was 7. It took like a year and a half to get visas to come. And I have a comic strip about that.
Oh, I really would like to see that
Cossacks. It's in World War III.
Yeah.
It's from
So is that going to be part of a book that you're putting out?
Yes.
Your book's going to be like a compilation of your work?
It's a compilation. It's an autobiographical compilation. Whoops. But most of the pieces are about art on the front lines of different political movements.
Right.
But the book starts with the story about my family and how I came to this point of view from a very young age. Then I went to music and art here in New York too. So I kind of, and there's another crazy story, but I don't think you have time for it. I was selected by the Ford Foundation to be in a prototype of the honors program at Brooklyn College. And it assigned you to a mentor. And they were really looking for people to beat the Russians to space. And I had the top grades in New York State in chemistry, in the proficiency exams.
Wow.
And I was a math whiz. So they recruited me, and they were going to put me into theoretical mathematics, about which I knew nothing and really didn't care about very much. But I thought I'd try it out. And me and my best friend, who was a modern dancer, we lasted in our math and science majors for 6 months. And I became a studio art major, and Ad Reinhardt was assigned as my mentor.
Who's?
Ad Reinhardt,
Yeah.
Black on Black Paintings, New York abstract expressionist person. Okay. And then I became the president of the SDS chapter and started saying I want to do artwork about the things I think. I don't want to do these abstract things that are to be on the walls of corporations or in art galleries. How does it all fit together? In 1967, I went on a college trip to Europe and made my way to Amsterdam and the Provost.
I remember you told me about that, but
And so I learned about taking back the streets and doing artwork as performance, and the bell comes in at the right time.
right.
And
Tell
it's never
us,
the same.
tell our audience, what is the Provost?
The Provost was the anarchist youth movement of Amsterdam in 1966, and they broke down the barriers of the city in terms of who controls the streets. So they did things like they'd have a poetry reading at midnight at the Dam Square, which was by the square by the railroad station, and it would be like beat poets performing out on the street, and it was kind of like a flash mob before cell phones.
This was in the 60s?
This is in 66.
66, okay.
And there's a really good book about it, but so they kind of were influenced by the French Situationists about freeing up the public space, making the public space human again, reclaiming what had been taken when the commons were absorbed by the ruling class. And it's like reclaiming the commons. They had a white bikes program, they had free bikes, they had food co-ops, and they had be-ins. And so I learned about all this by being incorporated into a little cluster of amazing friends, most of whom were gay men. And it was just an amazing, it was the first time that I had really gone anywhere. I was 19, and I met all sorts of folks who were all wonderful. I mean, people would take me riding on the backs of their bicycles to go places.
How long were you there for?
Like 2.5 months.
Oh, that's it?
all.
Oh my
And
God.
it was very compressed.
Yeah, it sounds like you did so much stuff.
And I got really close to this whole crowd. And Zeno van Ditshuizen, who is a male model, like a GQ-looking man, and I'm very attracted to men, generally, wanted to marry me so I could stay.
Nice.
And I just wasn't mature enough. And I was like a leader in the student movement, and the war was getting worse, and I felt obligated to go home. So I went home, and
So home at that time was still New York?
Brooklyn.
Yeah, Brooklyn.
And while I was in Amsterdam, I did some work with the Witte Krant, which was the white paper, which was their underground paper. And the person who introduced me to everyone, her name was Adinka, and she was an art student at the art school in Amsterdam. She was selling the paper on the street, and I just like was looking for my people. And I saw her on the street, and it's like, I think I found my people. And then she took me, and they took me to stay at somebody's house who was away with his wife in Lapland. And it was Roel van Dijn, who was like the theoretical leader of the Provost. So.
Louder.
Louder.
Sorry, I'm trying to
I know.
give a signal. Just
So yeah, so I started out pretty early. So since 67, '67, I went looking for an underground newspaper to work on. And it didn't take me really long. And it's been that. I didn't do comics until I met Seth DeBachman.
Oh, wow. When was that?
About 25 years ago, maybe a little bit more. I went to one of Seth's shows while I was in town visiting my family.
And what year is that? Like, oh yeah, you were saying like,
okay,
yeah.
Smitty was about 14, and he's 43. So yeah, 25 years ago, something like that. Smitty is one of my children. It's his AKA Smitty, named by some Stephanie Barber, some filmmaker.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyhow, I went to Seth's art show, and we introduced each other. And Seth doesn't remember this. And he says, I know who you are, because he knew my artwork from The Guardian, the Radical Weekly during the Vietnam War, where I was doing the artwork and covers. And he knew me from The Rat, the women's takeover of the underground paper. And he knew my artwork. He says, I know you. I know your artwork, because Seth and Peter and Eric Drucker had all worked at The Guardian like 8-10 years after I did, so they knew what I had been doing. Same paper, same place, everything. And I know your artwork. Why aren't you working with us? And I don't do cartoon. I've never done a cartoon. I've done cartoons that are one-off things, but I've never done a serial of things. And he just looks at me in his Seth way, and he said, but you could.
You know what? I got to tell you right now, Seth was the one who got me drawing comics.
Yes.
I went to a couple World War III meetings, and it was kind of the same. I had done like single panel cartoons, and I have my sketchbooks. I draw and I write.
Right.
And Seth was like, he's like, you're drawing and you're writing, so why not do a comic? And so
eternally grateful.
It's so funny that it's
grateful.
like, yeah, exactly.
That's what he does.
And when I credit him a lot. When I'm doing any kind of performance with like presenting comics or doing anything like that. We've done a bunch of those kind of things together.
Yeah.
And I always credit him with like, Seth is the one. Seth is the one who got me into drawing comics.
Hey.
Oh, look who's here! The beautiful Barbara Lee is blessing us today.
Are you Stephanie? No, never mind. What's your name?
Vicky.
Oh, you're Vicky. Oh my God, I got it all mixed up.
Vicky.
Anything else you want to ask
Vicky.
me? Oh, you're sure.
Barbara Lee.
Yes.
Eva. We have this ritual going on back here, which is a little loud
I can't stand it.
for us to tape over. Okay. I'm gonna